Moving on to factorising expressions. So factorising by taking the highest common factor. So looking at this first question, so we have 3x minus 18. Okay, so we write it out, 3x minus 18. And what I like to do, I like to start off with the numbers. So I see what is the highest common factor that I can take out of the numbers. So essentially, if you're new to factorization, what factorization is, it's like you're dividing a number out of the equation. So for example, the highest common factor of 3 and 18 is going to be 3. And essentially thinking about in your head, like you're dividing that 3 out. So 3x divided by 3, you're going to be just left with x. And negative 18 divided by 3 is going to be negative 6. Okay? And if you expand these brackets, you'll get back to the original equation. Looking at the next question, we see that we start off with a negative, so we can actually take a negative factor out, and the highest common factor out of 2 and 4 is going to be 2. So thinking about dividing by negative 2 out of both of them, so negative 4 divided by negative 2 is going to be 2y, negative 2 divided by negative 2 is going to be a positive 1, okay, because the two negatives, they cancel out, okay, so that's just a trick that might come in your future exam. Sorry, that's meant to be a square. So when we know when we can take a number and a letter is when we have the same letter in both of the equations as well. So looking at the numbers first, highest common factor of 6 and 18 is going to be 6. And the highest power of b we can take out is just b to the power of 1. Okay? So essentially, like we're dividing 6b out of 6b squared, if we have 2 b's here and we take 1 out, we're going to be left with just 1. And then we've got the minus. 18 divided by 6 is going to be 3. And we'll take that b out there. So all we're left with is just 6b in brackets b minus 3. Looking at the last question, we cannot take a number out. We can take a negative out because we have the negative to begin with. And we can take an x out because we have an x in both of the equations. So we're going to take a negative x. If we take a negative x out of there, we're going to be left with 2. And then like dividing by negative x, remember that's going to become a positive and then x. Okay. Looking at this last question, so the highest common factor we could take out is going to be a 4. And we can also take out a negative 4, and we can also take a y out. So when we're dividing by negative 4y, this is going to be 1 plus 2y. Moving on to a couple of more examples. So here we know we can take a b and an a out because that's in both. So if we take a a out, we know we can take our a to the power of 1, and with the b's we can take our b to the power of 1, and essentially like we're dividing, so we're taking an a out, so we have no a's left, and if we have 3 b's and we take a b out, we're going to be left with b squared, and we still got the minus. If we take a out of a squared, you're going to be left with just a, and we take the b out there, okay? Looking at this next question, so we can take a number out, which is 3. And the highest power of z we can take out is z squared. Okay, so the reason why is because we have 2 here and 3 here. Okay, so we're going to be left with 2xy minus just z. Okay, because we're going to take the 3 out and we're going to take 2 z's out of the 3, so we're going to be left with just a z. Okay. Looking at the next question, so what we know, we can take a x plus 3 out, okay, because that's what's going to be common out of both of them there. So thinking about there's like a 1 here, so if we take x plus 3, so x plus 3, okay, so say we take them both out, you're going to be just left with a plus 1. So we write a plus 1. Same concept with the next question. So thinking about there's like a negative 1 there. If we take x minus 2, you're going to be left with x minus 1. And last question, so there's a negative x there. You can think about a 1 here. So if we take a x minus 6 out, we're going to be left with 1 minus x. Moving on to the last section of one of the last sections of factorizing these expressions. So we also have a difference of two squares, okay? So that formula is going to be this one. So we got a squared minus b squared equals a plus b, a minus b, okay? So essentially it's like we're square rooting whatever the a is and also the b and putting it in these brackets. So looking at this question, if we square root the x, you're going to be left with x minus 3, x plus 3, okay? Looking at the next question, so y minus 7, y plus 7. The last question, so we're going to have y, and the square root of 1 is going to be 1, and then we're going to have y plus 1, okay? And looking at the next one, so the square root of 64 is going to be 8, okay, so we can write 8x, and then the square root of 25 is going to be 5, and then the same thing but just with a plus. The next question, so 5, same concept, so we're going to square root each side. Square root of 144 is going to be 12 a squared, and then that's going to, sorry, a, because we're square rooting the a, and the square root of 49 is going to be 7, and that's going to be a b. Okay. Looking at this next question, we see that we can take a common factor out. So that's 5. So if we take a 5 first, we're going to be left with x squared minus 9. And if we see the x squared minus 9, it's in the formula of this one here. So we can further factorize it by having a plus b, a minus b. Okay, so we just put the 5, and then we're going to have x minus 3 and x plus 3. The last question, we cannot take a common factor out, and it's in the form of 2 squares, so we're just going to be going with the formula, and remember, we're just square rooting the b, okay? So we're going to have b minus square root of 5, and then b plus square root of 5. In this section, we're going to be looking at factorizing by grouping. Okay, so essentially what we want to do, sometimes we might need to arrange the equation, but for here, what we're going to be doing is grouping them. Okay, so we have that group there and this here. Okay, so what's a common factor out of the first group here? It's going to be x. So you're going to have x minus 2b, and then out of this group, it starts off with a negative. So let's take a negative factor of 5, because that's the highest common factor there. We're going to be left with x minus 2b. Okay, and we see now that we have x minus 2b being the same. We take that out, and all we're left with is just x minus 5. Same concept in the second example, so let's group them. So taking a highest common factor there of 3x, and we're going to be left with, and out of these two, taking a highest common factor of negative 7, and you're going to be left with, okay, so we have x minus 2a being the same, and we take that common factor out, and we're left with just 3x minus 7.